Welcome, friends of history and seekers of great stories. Today, you embark on a journey not through fiction, but through the raw truth of human determination, courage, and brilliance. This is the story of Hannibal Barca, a man whose name thundered across the ancient world and whose boldness forever scarred the pride of mighty Rome. We will march alongside him, from the burning plains of Iberia to the icy peaks of the Alps, where men and beasts alike were tested by snow, hunger, and despair. You will see alliances forged in blood, betrayal lurking in shadows, and the impossible made real through sheer willpower. As you watch, imagine the crunch of snow beneath sandals, the trumpeting of elephants on narrow ledges, and the fierce beating of Carthaginian hearts determined never to kneel before Rome. This is more than history. It is legend, strategy, and endurance brought to life. Thank you for joining me, and prepare yourself. The crossing of the Alps begins now. Snow blinded the eyes, the mountain winds cut like blades, and men staggered under the weight of destiny. At their side, massive elephants, symbols of power, slipped and struggled against cliffs where one wrong step meant death. And at the front, a man with fire in his gaze pointed forward, declaring that no mountain, no Roman, and no force of nature could break his will. This was Hannibal Barca. This was the march that would terrify Rome forever. Subscribe for more history. Like and comment if you believe history should never be forgotten, and share to spark conversation about the lessons we must learn from the past. This is not myth. This is history. And it begins here. The courtyard is cool before dawn, the sky still a bruised purple over Carthage. Oil lamps tremble. A boy stands with his father before a stone altar that smells of cedar smoke and sacrifice. The boy is Hannibal, not yet a man, but his eyes are already sharp, hungry, reflecting flame like steel mirrors. His father, Hannibal Barca, has tasted war, loss, and humiliation at Roman hands. He does not speak of hatred with theatrics. He speaks of it like gravity, like the tide, relentless, shaping every shore it touches. Hamilcar kneels, placing a hand on Hannibal's shoulder. "You are my son," he says softly, "and also Carthage's son. We do not choose our enemies, sometimes they choose us. Rome has chosen us. Servants keep their distance." The household knows this is not a scene for gossip. It is an incision into destiny. Hamilcar's hand is warm. The altar stone is cold. Hannibal looks at the carved god, at the thin line of light spearing up from the horizon, and then at his father's face, carved by campaigns, lit by conviction. "Place your hand," Hamilcar says. Hannibal lays his palm on the altar. "You will never be a slave to fear," Hamilcar continues, "nor to Rome's ambition." "Swear it." Hannibal swallows. So he feels the texture of the stone, the faint grit on his skin. "I swear," he answers. "Hate Rome?" His father prompts, and the boy's voice firms. "I swear eternal enmity." But this is more than a boy's bravado. Hamilcar does not allow empty words. He walks Hannibal to the edge of the terrace, where the sea darkens like a sheet of hammered metal. "Hatred without discipline burns out," he warns. "Discipline without vision becomes a cage. Remember, son, we do not fight Rome because we love war. We fight because we love Carthage, our people, our future." He gestures toward the distant trade ships that ride gentle swells. "They would take all this. They would take your children's names. The oath you took must be the spine of your choices." The first birds call. A breeze carries salt and distant spice. Hannibal breathes it in and tastes a future he cannot name yet. Iberia's rivers, Gallic camps, the white glare of snow. The images come like sparks, accidental and prophetic. Hamilcar draws a small blade and nicks his palm, just enough for a bead of red. Hannibal does the same. Father and son press their hands together, blood to blood. The gesture seals what words began. Some day, Hamilcar says, you will face a barrier so absolute that men will call it impossible. You will not argue with it, you will go through it. Hannibal says nothing, but something in him answers anyway. The lamps flicker lower, and the sky opens to morning. In years to come, senators will whisper his name, mothers will warn children into obedience with tales of him, and soldiers will follow him where maps end. But here at this altar, he is a boy with a promise and a father's faith. The oath is done. The world has shifted a little on its axis. Rome does not know it yet, but it will. The city of Carthage gleamed in the sun, its harbors crowded with ships bearing ivory, grain, silver, and spices. The air smelled of salt and ambition. To its people, it was the heart of the Mediterranean. To Rome, it was a threat that could not be tolerated. The First Punic War had scarred both cities. Carthage's fleet was broken, its pride wounded, its treasury drained. Yet the memory of humiliation was most vivid in the family of Hannibal Barca. He had fought Rome on Sicily's rocky shores, had watched as his men bled and his ships burned. In the silence of defeat, he swore that Carthage would rise again, and that his sons would be weapons sharpened on the whetstone of hatred. Young Hannibal grew up in this atmosphere, the clash of oaths, the echo of drums, the bitterness of loss, and the constant reminder that Rome's shadow stretched over every dream Carthage might have. In the council halls, merchants argued for trade over war. Generals warned that Rome's hunger was endless. Senators counted profits while soldiers counted scars, and Hannibal listened. His mind, young but already hungry, absorbed everything. He knew Carthage was wealthy, but Rome was relentless. Wealth could buy soldiers, but only vision could outwit an enemy that would not stop until the Mediterranean was its lake. At night, Hannibal would walk along the harbor walls, staring at the sea. Somewhere across that horizon lay Rome, proud and swelling. He imagined the clash to come, felt the weight of his oath to his father. He would inherit not only command, but the hatred that defined his bloodline. The city bustled with trade by day and simmered with old anger by night. For Hannibal, both faces of Carthage were essential, wealth for armies, hate for purpose. The boy who swore an oath would become the man Rome feared most. And all of it began with this inheritance, a city split between commerce and conquest, and a family bound by vengeance, Iberia, land of mountains, rivers, and fierce tribes. It was here that Carthage built its second strength after losing Sicily. Hamilcar led campaigns in these rugged lands, carving a new empire from tribal loyalties and battlefields. But time, even for warriors, is a relentless enemy. When Hamilcar fell in battle, his mantle passed to Hasdrubal the Fair, and then, in time, to Hannibal. Still young, barely in his mid-20s, Hannibal was chosen by the army itself. They lifted him on their shields, shouting his name, demanding he lead. For soldiers, it was not bloodline alone. It was the memory of a boy who walked among them, ate with them, and shared their hardships. Hannibal understood Iberia. He had grown up with its languages, had drunk from its rivers, hunted in its forests, bargained with its chiefs. He was not a foreign master, but a leader shaped by the land itself. His marriage to a local princess tied him even closer. In camp, he trained with soldiers, fought mock duels, and studied maps by firelight. He was restless, always probing, always questioning. Rome, he knew, would not ignore Carthage's expansion. To wait was to surrender the initiative. His father's oath whispered in every decision. Hannibal's leadership was not gentle. It was sharp, demanding, but never distant. He punished betrayal ruthlessly, rewarded loyalty fiercely. Men who followed him would march into fire, not because they feared him, but because they trusted him to walk first into the flames. Rome's allies in Iberia watched nervously as Carthage grew stronger. The stage was being set, and at the center of it all stood Hannibal Barca, no longer a boy, no longer an apprentice, but commander. South of the Ebro River stood Saguntum, a city allied with Rome. For Hannibal, it was a dagger pointed at his flank, a symbol that Rome's shadow already crossed into Iberia. To march against it was risky, but to ignore it was worse. The siege began with thunder. Carthaginian rams smashed against stone, archers loosed volleys, and the cries of defenders echoed from the walls. Hannibal commanded every tale, inspecting engines, encouraging soldiers, directing assaults with sharp precision. Saguntum's defenders fought with desperate courage. Fires consumed siege towers, sappers were driven out with boiling oil. For months, the city refused to fall. Hunger gnawed at both besiegers and besieged, but Hannibal would not relent. He walked the lines daily, visible to all, calm even under arrows. His presence steadied the weary. At last, famine broke Saguntum. The gates gave way, and Carthaginian troops surged in. The streets ran with the price of resistance. Hannibal entered not with mercy, but with message. Carthage would not allow Rome's foothold here. The flames of Saguntum lit the sky, and the embers carried a signal across the sea. Rome would answer, and answer it did. The Second Punic War had begun. The flames of Saguntum were seen not only in Iberia, but in Rome's Senate. Word of the city's fall reached the Eternal City like an insult carried on smoke. Erhiti's smoke. Senators gathered in the Curia, robes flowing, voices sharp. Some demanded immediate vengeance, others counseled caution. But all agreed Carthage had broken the treaty. Rome sent envoys across the sea, stern men with grave faces. They confronted the Carthaginian council, demanding Hannibal's surrender. Carthage hesitated. Pride warred with fear, commerce with honor. But the Barcid faction was strong, and the Senate would not betray its greatest general. The envoys, denied, returned to Rome with their answer. In the Curia, one senator, Fabius, stood and demanded clarity. The chief envoy, Quintus Fabius, grasped the folds of his toga and declared, "Here we bring you peace or war. Choose." The Carthaginian spokesman replied coldly, "Choose yourselves." Fabius let the toga fall. "Then we choose war," the chamber thundered. The Second Punic War was no longer looming. It had begun, and Rome, unknowingly, had invited its deadliest enemy across mountains it believed uncrossable. The Ebro River glittered in the Iberian sun, its waters swift, its banks heavy with reeds and willows. Behind Hannibal stretched the victories of Iberia, alliances won, armies forged, Saguntum smoldering in memory. Before him lay the great gamble, a march that would carry Carthage's war across rivers, mountains, and nations to the very gates of Rome. Crossing the Ebro was not merely geographical, it was political. To Rome, the treaty line ended here. To Hannibal, the river marked only the beginning. He gathered his generals and officers along the bank. "Rome believes this river is our chain," he declared. "Let us show them it is our sword." Tens of thousands assembled, Africans hardened by desert sun, Iberians fierce with tribal pride, Numidians swift upon their horses, and at the rear a line of massive grey shapes, elephants, restless and majestic. Drums echoed, horns blared. Soldiers waded into the cold current, shields lifted overhead. Not all would follow. Hannibal released many Iberian levies who hesitated at the thought of Italy. "Go home with honor," he told them, "but know the greater honor lies ahead." For those who stayed, loyalty deepened. The Pyrenees rose in the distance, jagged and dark, Each step northward was another step into legend. Hannibal's oath was now a river crossed, a road chosen, and no turning back. The Pyrenees loomed with sharp ridges and shadowed valleys. Hannibal's army wound its way into narrow passes where the air thinned and silence pressed like a weight. The march was not peaceful. Bands of hostile tribes harried them from cliffs, arrows falling like hail. Hannibal moved with relentless pace, knowing hesitation meant death. Scouts fanned out. Rear guards clashed in ambushes. When tribes struck, Hannibal struck harder, sending Numidian cavalry to chase them down, sending Iberian allies up the slopes with swift vengeance. The path became a long scar of skirmishes, each bend hiding threat. The army's discipline was tested. Supplies dwindled. Soldiers trudged with weary steps, boots torn on stone. But Hannibal was always visible, riding at the front or walking among the ranks, speaking to them in their own tongues. He knew that men endured more when they believed their commander endured with them. The Pyrenees were crossed with sweat, steel, and silence. Many fell, but the survivors emerged hardened. Behind them lay Iberia, now a memory. Ahead stretched Gaul, wild and uncertain. Hannibal had turned mountains into a crucible, and his men into steel. Beyond the Pyrenees stretched the land of the Gauls, tribes fierce, unpredictable, and proud. To march through their territory was to gamble with survival. Hannibal knew he must win allies, not endless enemies. At the banks of a broad river, he met Gallic chieftains, draped in furs and bronze torques, their warriors painted in blue swirls. They demanded tribute, hostages, or safe passage. Hannibal offered something greater, Rome's downfall. His words painted Rome as the enemy of all freedom, the devourer of tribes. Some Gauls joined him eagerly, eager for plunder and vengeance. Others plotted betrayal, luring Carthaginian detachments into ambush. Hannibal punished treachery ruthlessly, burning villages that turned against him, sparing those who honored their word. His reputation spread, a commander both generous and terrifying. The gamble paid. Tens of thousands of Gauls swelled his army. The Carthaginian host was now a river of nations, united by Rome's shadow. Yet Hannibal knew loyalty was fragile, bound by fear and promise. Still, he had forged a path north. Italy was closer. The Alps were next. The Rhône River was a wide silver barrier, fast and dangerous. On the far side, hostile tribes watched with spears, ready to block Hannibal's advance. To delay was to lose momentum. To cross was to risk disaster. Hannibal devised a bold plan. He ordered rafts built from logs, lashed with ropes, coated with earth, for elephants to stand upon. While carpenters worked day and night, he sent a detachment upriver to build a hidden crossing. At dawn, they struck from behind the enemy, scattering them in confusion. The main army surged forward. Men clutched shields as rafts wobbled. Horses snorted, terrified. Elephants bellowed, trunks raised high as they felt the water shift beneath them. Some swam beside the rafts, their massive forms cutting through the current. Soldiers cheered as beasts and men alike reached the far bank. The Rhône was conquered not only by muscle, but by cunning. Hannibal had shown again that obstacles were but challenges waiting for imagination. And across the river, Italy drew nearer. The valley opened, and there they were, the Alps, a wall of white, jagged teeth rising into the sky, capped with eternal snow. Hannibal's army fell silent. Even veterans of Iberia, men who had faced ambushes and rivers, stared in awe and dread. The mountains looked less like earth and more like the bones of gods. Hannibal rode to the front, cloak snapping in the wind. He studied the horizon, unmoving. His officers exchanged uneasy glances. Some whispered of turning back. Others suggested wintering in Gaul. Hannibal's gaze cut through them all. "Rome believes this wall is our prison," he said, voice steady, carrying over the gathered men. "But I tell you, this wall is our gateway. Beyond it lies the heart of our enemy. Beyond it lies destiny." Murmurs rippled. The men did not cheer wildly. The sight before them was too terrible. But resolve took root. They had followed Hannibal across rivers and tribes. They would follow him now into the jaws of the impossible. As night fell, campfires flickered against the cold. The mountains loomed above like watchful giants. The climb would begin at dawn, where the first steps into the Alps were like walking into another world. The air thinned, biting cold wrapped itself around every man. Snow crunched under sandals, numbing feet. Breath came in plumes. The road, if it could be called that, narrowed to a path where only 1 or 2 men could walk abreast. Hannibal ordered strict discipline. Scouts cleared ahead, marking the safest paths. Soldiers tied themselves in groups to avoid falling from narrow ledges. Pack animals stumbled. The elephants moved reluctantly, each step measured, their bulk a dangerous advantage and liability. Snowstorms struck suddenly, burying men waist deep, blinding them with whirling white. Still, Hannibal marched at the front. His presence was the army's anchor. He laughed with soldiers, urging them forward, reminding them of Rome's soft villas waiting beyond the mountains. The climb drained the weak. Some collapsed and were left behind, frozen statues by morning. Hannibal did not stop. He knew hesitation would destroy them all. The Alps demanded tribute in blood and will, and Hannibal paid with both. Every ridge crested brought another. The mountains seemed endless, yet the army pressed on, bound not by ease, but by the impossible dream their commander demanded. The mountains were not empty. Gaulish tribes, hostile and fierce, watched Hannibal's march from above. As the army entered a narrow gorge, rocks tumbled from the cliffs, shouts erupted, and a storm of spears fell. Chaos spread, soldiers scattered, elephants trumpeted in panic, mules bolted. Hannibal remained unshaken. He ordered shields raised overhead, forming a protective shell against missiles. Cavalry could not maneuver in the narrow pass, so he sent light infantry scrambling up the slopes. The fight turned vertical, soldiers clinging to rocks, trading blows on ledges where one slip meant death. The ambush threatened to break the army, but Hannibal's calm steadied the men. He rode into the thick of it, shouting orders, his presence a beacon amid the storm. Gradually, the Carthaginians pushed back, seizing the high ground. Tribesmen broke, fleeing into the snow. The victory was costly. Dozens lay crushed under rocks, animals killed, supplies lost. Hannibal surveyed the carnage and knew the worst was yet to come. If one ambush could wound them so deeply, what would the true heart of the Alps demand? But retreat was not in his blood. The army buried their dead in frozen ground and marched on. After days of fighting and marching, the army camped in a wide hollow. Fires glowed against snow, men huddled close for warmth. Yet even here, danger lingered. Envoys from a local tribe entered camp, offering guides and food in exchange for peace. Hannibal listened carefully. Some officers urged refusal, fearing treachery. Hannibal, however, knew diplomacy could save lives. He agreed, but with caution. The envoys were treated as honored guests, but spies followed them discreetly. Hannibal's trust was calculated, never blind. That night, Hannibal walked through the campfires, speaking with soldiers. He reminded them of the oath, of Rome's arrogance, of the glory waiting beyond. His words kindled hearts like the fires kindled wood. Men nodded, eyes reflecting flames and conviction. The envoys returned with food, and guides prepared to lead them through a dangerous stretch. Whether they were true allies or traitors was uncertain. Hannibal had gambled before. He would gamble again. The night fires burned bright against the cold, and the army slept under a canopy of stars. The Alps whispered around them, their silence deeper than any negotiation. Morning revealed the harsh truth. The path ahead was a sheet of ice, a road polished by centuries of wind and snow. Horses slipped, men fell, carts overturned. Even elephants stumbled, their massive feet searching for a grip. The guides, true to their word, led them forward, but at a cost. The path was narrow, the drop sheer. Every step was a gamble with gravity. Men dug their spears into the ground for balance, gripping each other's arms. Hannibal dismounted, walking beside his men. "If your commander walks, you can walk," he declared. The soldiers drew courage from his example. Slowly, painfully, the army moved forward. Cries echoed as men slipped to their deaths, but the line pressed on. The ice was not just beneath their feet, it was in their hearts. Despair crept like frost, yet Hannibal's steady presence, his refusal to yield, thawed the coldest fears. He spoke of Rome waiting, of victory purchased by hardship. Each word was a torch against the chill. At day's end, the army reached a plateau. Fires lit, wounds tended. They looked back on the icy path with awe. They had conquered another piece of the mountain. The Alps would not break them. Not yet. The army reached a section of the mountain where the path simply ended. Dead, a sheer wall of rock blocked the way. The ledge so narrow that carts could go no farther. For some, it was the breaking point. Murmurs spread. The Alps cannot be crossed, but Hannibal refused despair. He summoned the strongest men, carpenters, and engineers. "We will carve a road," he declared. Axes rang against stone, chisels sparked in the cold. Trees were felled and lashed together to form scaffolds. Soldiers hung from ropes, hacking footholds into the cliff. Progress was brutal and slow. Men shivered, fingers numb, sweat freezing on brows. Yet Hannibal walked among them, steadying ladders, lifting rocks, proving that no labor was beneath him. His presence silenced doubt. By day's end, a crude path stretched forward. Narrow, treacherous, but passable. The army cheered with hoarse voices, their exhaustion briefly forgotten. They had forced the mountain to yield. This moment was more than survival. It was symbolic. Rome had never imagined such audacity. Hannibal's army had become not just soldiers but builders, bending nature itself to their will. The Alps groaned, but they gave way. The new road was barely wide enough. On one side, the wall of mountain. On the other, a void plunging into mist. The army inched forward, every step echoing in the silence. Hearts pounded like war drums. Carts creaked dangerously. Oxen lowed in fear. Men steadied loads with trembling hands. A single misstep could drag dozens into oblivion. One cart toppled, crashing into the abyss, its sound vanishing into endless space. Soldiers froze, but Hannibal shouted, "Forward! The mountain will not claim us." He ordered ropes tied around elephants and carts, men bracing one another in chains of muscle and will. Slowly, painfully, they moved. Hannibal walked at the edge, visible to all, his calm more powerful than rope. Hours stretched into eternity. At last, the column emerged onto wider ground. Cheers erupted, relief breaking tension. Many collapsed in exhaustion. Some wept openly. They had faced the abyss and lived, but Hannibal did not celebrate. He looked at the cliffs still ahead. If this was only the beginning, what trials yet waited? The Alps gave no victories easily. Every heartbeat was borrowed from death. The Alps struck back. Days of climbing brought the army to a high pass where snow lay deep and unstable. As men trudged forward, A thunderous crack split the air. Snow and rock roared down, sweeping soldiers and animals in a white torrent. Screams vanished under the avalanche. Panic spread like fire. Survivors clawed through snow, dragging comrades free. Hannibal rode forward, dismounting to pull men with his own hands. His voice cut through terror. "Stand! The mountain tests us, but Rome will fear us for this very day." The army rallied, digging frantically, forming lines to clear paths. Dozens were lost, supplies buried, but Hannibal refused despair. He declared the avalanche a sign that the gods forged them stronger than Rome's legions. That night the camp was silent, grief heavy in the air. Hannibal moved among the men, sharing their bread, mourning with them. Yet even in sorrow, resolve hardened. They had survived nature's wrath, and each survivor carried the weight of those lost. The Alps demanded sacrifice, and Hannibal's army paid it. Step by step, at last, the army crested a high summit. The world spread below in endless white. But victory was hollow, food was gone, hunger gnawed more fiercely than spears. Men chewed leather straps, animals collapsed from weakness. Hannibal gathered the survivors. "We stand above the world," he said, voice echoing in the thin air. "Rome believes no army can stand here. Yet here we are, and tomorrow we will stand on their soil." To sustain his men, Hannibal ordered foraging parties into valleys, scouring for roots, bark, and hidden stores. Gaulish guides provided scraps, frozen nuts, wild herbs. Hannibal shared his own rations openly, sitting among common soldiers, proving he suffered as they did. The elephants fared poorly. Their handlers wept as beasts weakened. Still, the army pressed on. They ate little, but they marched, each step closer to Italy. The summit was both triumph and torment. From here, the descent began. The sight of Italy far to the south rekindled weary spirits. The Alps were not endless. Rome lay waiting, unaware that an army of ghosts was descending to haunt them. The morning sun broke across the mountains, and at last Italy lay before them. Rolling hills and green valleys shimmered in the distance, a paradise compared to the frozen hell behind. Soldiers gasped, some fell to their knees, others laughed or cried. Hannibal stood tall, arms outstretched. "There it is, Italy! There lies Rome's heart." His words cut through exhaustion. Suddenly, the suffering seemed bearable. The journey had meaning, the impossible had become real. For many, the sight of Italy was salvation. For others, it was a reminder the hardest battles still lay ahead. The Alps had broken bodies but forged spirits. Rome would soon learn what had been born on these ridges. That night, campfires burned warmer. Songs rose weakly but proudly. Men spoke of home, of victory, of the plunder awaiting. Hannibal walked among them, listening, smiling faintly. His eyes never left the horizon. The Alps had taken thousands, but they had failed to stop him. Hannibal had brought his army to Italy. The greatest gamble in history had succeeded. Rome's nightmare was no longer distant. It was marching straight toward them. If climbing the Alps had broken bodies, descending them threatened to break souls. The downward slopes were steeper, the paths narrower, the ice more treacherous. Carts skidded uncontrollably, oxen were dragged into ravines, and men slipped to their deaths with a single misstep. Hannibal rode at the front, but soon dismounted, forcing himself to walk with his men. "The mountain falls before us as much as it rose behind us," he told them. Yet the descent tested courage even more than the climb. Gravity itself was the enemy, pulling every step toward oblivion. Soldiers cut branches into makeshift crutches and sledges. Ropes bound men together for safety. Elephants slid awkwardly, trumpeting in fear, their handlers guiding them down steep inclines with desperate shouts. Progress was slow, and morale wavered. Some cursed Hannibal, whispering of doom. Yet each evening, as they lit fires and looked back on the peaks above, pride kindled. They had already crossed the uncrossable. Italy was below. Rome awaited. The Alps were not finished, but neither was Hannibal. Downward was not easier, but every step downward was closer to destiny. The descent was suddenly shattered by thunder, not from sky, but from stone. Rocks crashed down from cliffs above, dislodged by weather and weight. Entire sections of the path collapsed, sending men and animals tumbling. Panic surged. Amid the chaos, the elephants proved their worth. Where men faltered, the beasts held steady. One massive bull stood firm at the edge of the path, blocking a rockslide with its bulk, saving dozens. Soldiers cheered, rallying around the elephants as if the gods themselves marched with them. Still, losses were heavy. Supply carts were crushed, men buried under rubble. Hannibal ordered immediate clearing. "The mountain throws stones, but it cannot throw our will," he shouted. His words carried above the roar. The elephants pressed onward, their courage inspiring men who moments before were ready to despair. The animals were no longer just symbols. They were comrades, giants whose survival meant the army's survival. That night, soldiers decorated the beasts with scraps of cloth and garlands, honoring them as fellow warriors. For once, the camp sang. Even in the shadow of rockfall, hope endured. The mountain punished without mercy. Men lay broken with shattered limbs, animals collapsed, wounds festered in the cold. To leave them behind would have preserved speed, but Hannibal would not abandon his soldiers. Whoa! He ordered the wounded carried on makeshift litters, fashioned from branches and cloaks. Stronger men rotated shifts, dragging comrades across treacherous slopes. Morale surged. Hannibal had shown them that every life mattered, that loyalty was not one-sided. The army slowed, but its unity deepened. Soldiers who once cursed him now followed with renewed devotion. Hannibal himself carried water to the injured, binding wounds with his own hands. His officers did the same. Rome had wealth, Rome had numbers, but Hannibal had something rarer, an army that believed their leader's heart beat with theirs. The Alps continued to demand blood, but Hannibal's refusal to sacrifice men for speed saved not just lives, but the soul of his army. In the cold silence, a new bond was forged. They were no longer merely Carthaginian, Iberian, or Gaul. They were Hannibal's army. The Alps unleashed one more trial, a storm of snow and wind that descended like a beast. Visibility vanished. The army became a scattered line of ghosts in blizzard white. Men stumbled blindly, some freezing in place, others wandering from the path. Elephants trumpeted, their roars swallowed by the wind. Fires sputtered, tents collapsed. Hannibal forced the men into clusters, ordering them to huddle together for warmth. He walked through the storm himself, cloak snapping, urging the stragglers onward. "Close ranks! No man dies alone," he roared, his voice a lifeline in the howl of wind. All night they endured, pressed against one another, shaking but alive. By morning the storm passed. The army emerged battered but unbroken, snow covering the dead like a shroud. Hannibal stood among the survivors, frost on his beard, eyes burning. "The storm has failed," he told them. "Rome's storm will fail as well." The men cheered weakly, but it was enough. Once again they had endured. The mountain had given its worst, and Hannibal still marched. The army reached a pass blocked by a sheer wall of rock. It seemed impassable, but Hannibal would not turn back. He devised a bold plan that stunned even his officers. He ordered great fires built against the rock face. All night, men piled wood, felling trees from the slopes, feeding the flames until the wall glowed red. Then, when dawn came, Hannibal commanded water and vinegar poured upon the heated stone. With a hiss and crack, the rock shattered. Soldiers cheered as they hammered wedges into fissures, breaking the wall apart. The path widened, the mountain forced to yield. Elephants and carts could pass. Hannibal's genius had turned nature's fortress into rubble. The men believed him invincible, not because he conquered men, but because he conquered mountains. Rome had legions. Hannibal had will. And that will reshaped the earth itself. After weeks of unrelenting hardship, the army climbed one final ridge. The wind howled across jagged rocks, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and grass from the valleys beyond. Exhaustion dragged at every step, yet the men knew this was the last wall between them and Italy. Hannibal halted at the crest. He raised his hand, and silence spread through the column. Before them stretched rolling foothills, green valleys, rivers glinting in the sun. The Alps, terrible and majestic, now lay behind. Cheers broke out, hoarse and weak, but filled with triumph. Men embraced, some fell to their knees in prayer. Even the elephants trumpeted, sensing relief. Hannibal allowed the moment, then raised his voice. "You have done what no army in history has done. You have crossed the Alps. Rome believed it impossible. Now they will believe nothing is impossible for us." The army's pride swelled. They were broken in body, but their spirits burned like fire. The last ridge had been conquered, and destiny lay ahead. The army descended into the fertile plains of Piedmont. Compared to the frozen hell of the mountains, it felt like paradise. Grass underfoot, rivers to drink from, villages dotting the landscape. But this was not peace. Tribes of northern Italy eyed the foreign army with suspicion. Some sent envoys offering cautious welcome, others prepared to resist. Hannibal knew his army needed rest, food, and allies. He moved swiftly, sending detachments to forage and negotiate. In Piedmont villages, peasants gaped at the elephants, whispering of gods walking among men. Hannibal used the spectacle wisely, letting the beasts parade to awe and intimidate. He promised protection to those who pledged loyalty and unleashed ruthless discipline on those who resisted. The army recovered strength. Soldiers washed in rivers, mended armor, feasted on grain. Hannibal spoke to chiefs around campfires, weaving promises of independence from Rome's grip. Italy was no longer distant. They had entered it, scarred but unbroken, ready to ignite rebellion. The Piedmont became Hannibal's first foothold, the soil of his war against Rome. When the army gathered for its first full rest, Hannibal ordered a count. The numbers were grim. From nearly Chaucer's soldiers who had set out, fewer than half remained. Of Sancer's elephants, barely a dozen survived. Horses were skeletal, many missing. The officers looked to Hannibal. Some feared the army was too depleted to fight Rome. But Hannibal stood before them, eyes blazing. "Do not count only the dead. Count the living, the strongest, the most loyal, the most tested. These men will defeat Rome's legions because they have already defeated mountains." The words rekindled fire. The survivors were no longer merely soldiers. They were legends in their own right. Their scars were proof, their endurance their weapon. Hannibal ordered sacrifices to the gods, honoring the fallen. The army stood silent as fires burned, prayers rising with the smoke. They mourned, but they also believed. Rome had not faced men like these. Counting the cost did not break them. It reminded them of what they had paid and what victory would mean. News of Hannibal's crossing spread like wildfire. Among the northern Italian tribes, two great peoples, the Insubrese and the Boii, saw opportunity. They had long suffered under Rome's dominance, their lands taxed and their freedoms chained. Hannibal's arrival was a spark. Envoys came to his camp. The Insabres wore heavy torques and furs, the boy fierce with painted shields. Hannibal welcomed them warmly, reminding them that Rome's yoke could be broken. "I did not cross mountains for Carthage alone," he told them. "I came for freedom, yours as well as mine." The tribes pledged men and supplies. Gaulish warbands swelled his ranks, their drums and horns joining Carthaginian chants. For the first time, Hannibal's army grew instead of dwindled. The elephants, paraded through tribal villages, sealed the bond. Rome had no such wonders. Hannibal had transformed from invader to liberator. In their eyes, Rome's grip on the north weakened, and a storm began to gather. In Rome, word arrived that Hannibal had crossed the Alps. At first, senators scoffed. It was impossible. But when envoys confirmed the news, shock rippled through the Curia. The impossible had happened. Carthage's greatest general now stood in Italy itself. Panic spread among the Roman people. Mothers whispered Hannibal's name like a curse. Children were warned into obedience with the threat of the Carthaginian elephants. Merchants fled northern towns. Soldiers were conscripted in haste. In the Senate, fierce debate erupted. Some demanded immediate legions march north. Others counseled patience, fearing Hannibal sought to lure them into traps. But all agreed Rome could no longer ignore the war. Hannibal had turned Italy itself into the battlefield. Meanwhile, in his camp, Hannibal sharpened his blade. He smiled faintly as reports reached him of Rome's panic. Now, he told his officers, Rome will know fear. The mountains were behind him. The war had truly begun. Was truly. The plains of northern Italy stretched wide, the chill of winter settling over them. Hannibal's scouts returned with news. A Roman army had encamped near the Trebia River. The Senate had answered his challenge. Now, for the first time on Italian soil, Rome and Carthage would test one another face to face. Hannibal wasted no time. He ordered skirmishes to harass the Roman lines, probing their strength. Numidian cavalry galloped across the plains, taunting Roman horsemen, luring them into quick clashes. The Romans, impatient, charged after them, only to be driven back by hidden reserves. At night, Hannibal walked through his camp. Fires crackled, men sharpened spears, and elephants loomed in the shadows. "Tomorrow," Hannibal told his officers, "we will show Rome what men forged by mountains can do." His calm confidence settled the soldiers' nerves. Across the river, the Romans also prepared. Their camp bristled with activity, legions drilling, officers shouting orders. They were disciplined, numerous, and certain of victory. The Trebia was more than a river. It was a line drawn in history. Tomorrow, it would run red. Dawn broke cold. Frost coated the grass, and the Trebia River ran icy and swift. Hannibal had prepared his trap. He placed his brother Mago and a picked force in concealment near the riverbank, hidden by reeds and mist. The rest of the army stood ready, cavalry and elephants in front, infantry behind. On the Roman side, Consul Sempronius, eager for glory, ordered his men to cross. Hungry, cold, and poorly prepared, the legions waded into the freezing water, shivering as the current numbed their limbs. Hannibal watched from horseback, a faint smile on his lips. The battle began with feints. Numidians darted forward, hurling javelins, then retreating, luring the Romans deeper. When the legions reached the far bank, Hannibal gave the signal. His elephants charged, cavalry swept in from both wings, and the infantry locked shields. The Romans were trapped in Hannibal's design before they even realized it. The frost bit deeper than swords. Men stumbled, their strength sapped by cold. Hannibal's army fought with the ferocity of those who had survived mountains. Rome had walked into a snare of ice and fire. The clash at Trebia was thunder and chaos. Roman legions pressed forward with disciplined shields, their pila flying in deadly arcs. Carthaginian infantry met them head-on, Iberian swords flashing, Gaulish war cries echoing. The elephants tore into the Roman cavalry, scattering horses with terror. Numidians circled like hawks, hurling javelins before vanishing. Hannibal, calm in the storm, guided the flow like a conductor of war. Then Magoa's hidden force struck. From behind reeds and snowdrifts, fresh troops fell upon the Roman rear. The trap closed. Surrounded, frozen, harried, the Roman formation collapsed into chaos. Men fell by the thousands, trampled, cut down, drowned in the river. Hannibal's army, fewer in number but sharper in spirit, ground the legions into ruin. By day's end, the Trebia plain was a graveyard. The river carried Roman blood downstream, a crimson testament to Hannibal's genius. This was not just victory, it was a statement. Rome had met Hannibal in open battle and been broken. The Alps had forged his army into iron, and that iron had struck Rome's pride. After the slaughter, winter clamped down on northern Italy. Hannibal established camps among friendly tribes, nursing his battered army back to strength. Fires burned constantly, snow piled at the edges of tents, and men huddled for warmth. The Romans, humiliated, withdrew south, licking their wounds. But Rome did not break. They raised new armies, trained fresh recruits, preparing for the next clash. Hannibal knew Trebia was only the opening act. In camp, he studied maps, tracing rivers and roads with a steady finger. He spoke with tribal chiefs, securing supplies and loyalty. His soldiers trained even in snow, sparring with wooden weapons, drilling in formations. Elephants were pampered, fed with gathered fodder, treated as sacred comrades, yet hardship remained. Frostbite claimed fingers and toes. Food was scarce. The men had to be reminded daily why they fought. Hannibal's presence was constant. He dined with common soldiers, laughed at their jokes, walked among the sick. He was more than commander. He was their anchor. The winter of Erech-Ishabad BCE was bitter, but it hardened the Carthaginian host further. Rome might recover, but Hannibal's army was no less ready. They had tasted victory in Italy, and they hungered for more. Though months had passed since the Alps, the crossing remained etched in the army's soul. Around fires, men told tales of snowstorms, avalanches, and narrow cliffs. New recruits listened wide-eyed, their respect deepening. The crossing was no longer just an ordeal, it was legend. Hannibal encouraged these stories. He knew myth was as powerful as steel. Rome has legions, he told his officers, but we have the mountains in our blood. The shadow of the Alps also spread beyond his camp. Across Italy, tribes spoke of Hannibal's impossible feat. To some he was a liberator, to others a terror. Roman mothers whispered of him to frighten children into obedience. Even senators admitted privately that no Roman general had matched such audacity. But legends cut both ways. The men were proud, but also haunted. They remembered friends lost in snow, elephants buried under avalanches, comrades frozen in place like statues. The Alps were a ghost that marched with them, a reminder of both their strength and their sacrifice. Hannibal himself carried that ghost. In his private moments, he stared at the horizon, seeing not only Italy's plains, but also the peaks he had conquered. They were behind him, but their shadows stretched long into every battle yet to come. Winter waned, and Hannibal prepared his next campaign. Yet before striking again, he sent word back to Carthage. Messengers carried scrolls across treacherous seas, recounting the miracle of the Alpine crossing and the victory at Trebia. In the Carthaginian council chamber, senators read the reports aloud. Some gasped at the audacity, others scoffed. Merchants demanded profit, generals demanded reinforcements. Yet all agreed Hannibal had done the impossible. The Alps were no longer Rome's shield. Hannibal's words were deliberate. I have brought war into Italy. Send grain, gold, and men, and together we will crush Rome at its heart. But Carthage hesitated. Political factions bickered, resources were slow to come. Hannibal knew he could not rely solely on his homeland. His army, his allies in Italy, and his will would have to suffice. In his camp, he told his officers, Carthage debates, Rome rallies, but we act. His men nodded. They had learned long ago. Hannibal's true capital was not a city, but his army's loyalty. Rome, reeling from Trebia, chose a new strategy. Fabius Maximus, elected dictator, studied Hannibal's movements carefully. He knew direct battle would mean disaster. Instead, he wove a net of caution, avoiding open combat, shadowing Hannibal's army, cutting supplies, burning fields before the Carthaginians could reach them. The Romans mocked him as cumptator, the delayer. But Hannibal saw the wisdom in his enemy. For the first time, Rome refused to be baited. Hannibal marched through Italy, seeking battle, offering plunder to tribes. But Fabius hovered like a shadow, always near, never striking. Frustration simmered in Hannibal's camp. His soldiers wanted action, his allies wanted Rome broken. Yet Hannibal remained patient. He probed for weakness, waiting for Rome to slip. Around campfires, Gauls muttered about famine, Iberians grumbled about endless marches. Hannibal walked among them, calm as ever. Rome fears us too much to fight, he reminded them. And fear is already a victory. The Fabian net did not strangle Hannibal, but it slowed him. The war was no longer only about courage. It was about endurance. Hannibal was no longer just the man who crossed the Alps. He was the general who held Italy in terror. Each village his army passed whispered of elephants and ghosts from mountains. Rome could not crush him, but neither could he yet crush Rome, he adapted. No longer merely the daring mountaineer, Hannibal became master of maneuver. He chose ground carefully, ambushed Roman columns, and lived off Italy's land with ruthless precision. He balanced diplomacy and war, punishing betrayal, rewarding loyalty. His soldiers noticed the shift. We crossed mountains with him, they said, but now we dance fields with him. Hannibal's genius was not bound to terrain. He was whatever the war required. Yet, he never let the legend fade. Around fires, he encouraged men to retell their Alpine ordeal, weaving it into identity. You are not just soldiers, he told them. You are the men who conquered mountains. Rome cannot match that. By now, Rome knew it too. Hannibal was not a raider or invader. He was a commander who could fight, move, endure, and inspire on any ground. Time passed. Battles raged. But the Alps never left Hannibal's army. Veterans spoke of avalanches and storms, as if of gods themselves. The crossing became their badge of honor, their proof of invincibility. New recruits listened with awe. We are led by the man who defeated mountains, they whispered. The memory of snow was more than history. It was a weapon of morale. Each retelling hardened their belief that nothing could break them. Hannibal himself used the myth wisely. When doubt spread, he reminded them, did you not stand on the cliffs of death? Did you not march through storms where others would perish? And are you not here still? Cheers always followed. The Alps had killed thousands, but those who survived carried its spirit into every battle. The snow became their ghost, their companion, their reminder that they were chosen by destiny. Even Romans admitted it. Hannibal's men were different. They fought not just as soldiers, but as legends in flesh. Years would pass. Battles would be won and lost. Hannibal's fate would twist with time, but one thing never faded: the crossing of the Alps. Rome would call him monster, genius, threat. Carthage would call him savior and burden. Historians for centuries would marvel at his gamble. But to his men, he was simply the leader who asked the impossible and proved it could be done. The Alps stood eternal, yet Hannibal carved his name into them. Where others saw barriers, he saw roads. Where others saw death, he saw destiny. His march was not just military. It was myth, the transformation of man and beast into symbols of will. Generals after him studied his path, but few dared follow. The Alps were never crossed in such fashion again. They remained his monument. At the end of his life, exiled and hounded, Hannibal is said to have looked back and smiled faintly. The mountains, the rivers, the battles, they had not broken him. The legacy of the impossible lived on. And even now, when snow falls across Alpine peaks, some say the echo of elephants and marching feet can still be heard. Pride stood, winter waned, and Hannibal prepared his next campaign. Yet before striking again, he sent word back to Carthage. Messengers carried scrolls across treacherous seas, recounting the miracle of the Alpine crossing and the victory at Trebia. In the Carthaginian council chamber, senators read the reports aloud. Some gasped at the audacity, others scoffed. Merchants demanded profit, generals demanded reinforcements. Yet all agreed Hannibal had done the impossible. The Alps were no longer Rome's shield. Hannibal's words were deliberate. I have brought war into Italy. Send grain, gold, and men, and together we will crush Rome at its heart. But Carthage hesitated. Political factions bickered, resources were slow to come. Hannibal knew he could not rely solely on his homeland. His army, his allies in Italy, and his will would have to suffice. In his camp, he told his officers, Carthage debates, Rome rallies, but we act. His men nodded. They had learned long ago. Hannibal's true capital was not a city, but his army's loyalty. Rome, reeling from Trebia, chose a new strategy. Fabius Maximus, elected dictator, studied Hannibal's movements carefully. He knew direct battle would mean disaster. Instead, he wove a net of caution, avoiding open combat, shadowing Hannibal's army, cutting supplies, burning fields before the Carthaginians could reach them. The Romans mocked him as cunctator, the delayer. But Hannibal saw the wisdom in his enemy. For the first time, Rome refused to be baited. Hannibal marched through Italy, seeking battle, offering plunder to tribes. But Fabius hovered like a shadow, always near, never striking. Frustration simmered in Hannibal's camp. His soldiers wanted action, his allies wanted Rome broken. Yet Hannibal remained patient. He probed for weakness, waiting for Rome to slip. Around campfires, Gauls muttered about famine, Iberians grumbled about endless marches. Hannibal walked among them, calm as ever. Rome fears us too much to fight, he reminded them. And fear is already a victory. The Fabian net did not strangle Hannibal, but it slowed him. The war was no longer only about courage. It was about endurance. Hannibal was no longer just the man who crossed the Alps. He was the general who held Italy in terror. Each village his army passed whispered of elephants and ghosts from mountains. Rome could not crush him, but neither could he yet crush Rome, he adapted. No longer merely the daring mountaineer, Hannibal became master of maneuver. He chose ground carefully, ambushed Roman columns, and lived off Italy's land with ruthless precision. He balanced diplomacy and war, punishing betrayal, rewarding loyalty. His soldiers noticed the shift. We crossed mountains with him, they said. But now we dance fields with him. Hannibal's genius was not bound to terrain. He was whatever the war required. Yet, He never let the legend fade. Around fires, he encouraged men to retell their Alpine ordeal, weaving it into identity. "You are not just soldiers," he told them. "You are the men who conquered mountains." Rome cannot match that. By now, Rome knew it too. Hannibal was not a raider or invader. He was a commander who could fight, move, endure, and inspire on any ground. Time passed. Battles raged. But the Alps never left Hannibal's army. Veterans spoke of avalanches and storms, as if of gods themselves. The crossing became their badge of honor, their proof of invincibility. New recruits listened with awe. "We are led by the man who defeated mountains," they whispered. The memory of snow was more than history. It was a weapon of morale. Each retelling hardened their belief that nothing could break them. Hannibal himself used the myth wisely. When doubt spread, he reminded them, "Did you not stand on the cliffs of death? Did you not march through storms where others would perish? And are you not here still?" Cheers always followed. The Alps had killed thousands, but those who survived carried its spirit into every battle. The snow became their ghost, their companion, their reminder that they were chosen by destiny. Even Romans admitted it. Hannibal's men were different. They fought not just as soldiers, but as legends in flesh. Years would pass. Battles would be won and lost. Hannibal's fate would twist with time, but one thing never faded: the crossing of the Alps. Rome would call him monster, genius, threat. Carthage would call him savior and burden. Historians for centuries would marvel at his gamble. But to his men, he was simply the leader who asked the impossible and proved it could be done. The Alps stood eternal, yet Hannibal carved his name into them. Where others saw barriers, he saw roads. Where others saw death, he saw destiny. His march was not just military. It was myth, the transformation of man and beast into symbols of will. Generals after him studied his path, but few dared follow. The Alps were never crossed in such fashion again. They remained his monument. At the end of his life, exiled and hounded, Hannibal is said to have looked back and smiled faintly. The mountains, the rivers, the battles, they had not broken him. The legacy of the impossible lived on. And even now, when snow falls across Alpine peaks, some say the echo of elephants and marching feet can still be heard. Pride's good,